Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, day 480 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal reporter, Jeremy Sharon. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, good morning, Amanda.
Good morning. We are going to learn what transpired in court yesterday as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returned after sick leave to his corruption trial. Jeremy will shed light on what happened and what to expect from here on. And if a Supreme Court votes in a new president and the Justice Minister decides to boycott him, is his appointment valid? Jeremy will fill us in on the saga of Justice Isaac Amit versus Minister Yariv Levin. First, some updates. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group released a propaganda video last night of civilian hostage Arbel Yahoud, who is due to be released on Thursday. Also yesterday, security contractors have started inspecting vehicles in Gaza to prevent heavy weaponry from being moved to the north of the Strip, where tens of thousands, even potentially more, Palestinians returned to yesterday. And Egyptian officials said that Egyptian contractors, along with the U.S. firm, were running checkpoints to inspect the vehicles heading to the northern Gaza Strip. The contractors are part of an Egyptian-Qatari committee implementing the ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office is planning for the premier to travel to Washington next week to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. The trip has not been finalized and will be dependent on Netanyahu's health as he recovers from prostate surgery, but the plan is for him to depart on Sunday and return on Wednesday. So, Jeremy, you were in court yesterday with Netanyahu, and did he seem changed from previous appearances prior to his surgery?
Physically, I would say he actually didn't look too different. I think he was slightly more, I would say, tetchy, perhaps. He has expressed frustration about having to come to the trial in previous hearings. But yesterday, he outright said, "Why am I here? These charges are ridiculous. What am I sitting here for?" And it's something which he kind of just expressed in a slightly more angry and frustrated tones than I've heard him before. And I think that's also partly to do with the fact that obviously he's had this surgery, relatively serious surgery. There's been some post-operative complications, an infection, I believe. And him and his lawyers requested that they only have one hearing this week. And based on, his medical condition and also his need to deal with issues in Lebanon, in Gaza, the hostage release deal, and so on. And the judges actually refused to reduce the number of hearings. They reduced the time of the hearings by a couple of hours. But he actually said he told the judge yesterday that he was very disappointed that they'd said that and that they hadn't been more considerate of him. So I think, as we knew, this is not something which is particularly beneficial for a prime minister running the country to be on trial and have to go to court three times a week.
Of course, the hearing today was actually canceled because one of the judges is ill, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We're also not sure if it will take place tomorrow. But just in reference to what you said that he's planning to go to America, perhaps even next week. The press have not seen any requests by Netanyahu's defense lawyers to postpone next week's hearings yet. So, I'm not sure how the court will view a last-minute request to go abroad, especially in light of the fact that he's clearly planning to do so without consulting the court, or at least as far as we know, he hasn't consulted the court. So that's another wrinkle in this trial, which has already taken, over 4 years. We're in its fifth year now. And, Netanyahu started testifying on December 12th, I believe. And since that time, nearly 2 months has gone past and he's only actually testified on 7 days. So, the pace of this trial is incredibly, incredibly slow.
And we should emphasize, of course, that Netanyahu has no obligation to testify. He is doing this voluntarily, and his team, in fact, put him first in terms of the order of their witnesses. Now, you said yesterday that Netanyahu was a bit more touchy, which for our American listeners means a bit more, irritable or angry. And one of the things that he's been drilling down on throughout is the veracity of the indictment against him. So tell us a little bit more about what he said yesterday.
Well, in every session of Netanyahu's testimony so far, his lawyer has gone through in detail some of the hundreds of examples which the prosecution alleges constituted efforts or demands by Netanyahu and his family members and his associates to get better coverage from this news website Walla. And the criminal activity here is that that positive coverage is supposed to have been a bribe which Netanyahu accepted in return for doing regulatory favors for the Walla owner, Shaul Alovich, who had lots of other business interests. But the Netanyahu's defense attorney has repeatedly kind of poked holes in many of these examples, I should say. I think there's about 350 listed in the indictment, and we're only actually up to number 60 so far. But he has, repeatedly pointed out that where, for instance, the indictment says that a demand was made by Netanyahu, one of his associates, and that the demand was answered, we actually see that did not happen. There was no reciprocity from Walla. So, for instance, there was one example yesterday in which Netanyahu allegedly demanded that Walla cover some aspect of one of his son's military service, and the indictment says that this request was dealt with by the Walla staff, and in fact even by Walla owner Shaul Alovich. But the defense attorney pointed out that they could not find any article by Walla at that time talking about Netanyahu's son's military service, and that the police did not find such an article either. So, they're saying, why is this in the indictment? And this is just one example of many that we've seen, which I guess indicates, some shoddy work by the police and investigators in making these accusations against Netanyahu. And he denies that there was any grand kind of scheme to get better coverage, and that if there are occasions when when Netanyahu or his associates did make requests for better coverage, firstly they were requests and not part of an agreement, and second of all, often they weren't even agreed upon anyway, and that this is just something natural. This Netanyahu says this a lot. This is natural for a prime minister and his people to try and influence the media and be in touch with the media when they think something has been covered incorrectly. So that's very much the gist of Netanyahu's testimony yesterday, and for most of his time in court so far.
And do you think, Jeremy, that the team is going to take each case point by point and try and disprove every single point in this indictment?
Incredibly, it seems that might be the case, because a few weeks ago there was a hearing without Netanyahu when he wasn't able to attend, and the hearing was designed to kind of come to some kind of agreement between the prosecution and the defense, that the prosecution would remove several or dozens of the examples of alleged media interference as part of this quid pro quo agreement, and that in return the defense would not go through each item on the kind of micro detail. But the prosecution and the defense did not manage to come to that kind of agreement, and for the moment we're just left with this situation. So, like I said, I think in the first session, which Netanyahu testified in, we didn't go into the detail of these examples. The 6 sessions, we've covered 60 items so far. So, that leaves a lot more sessions before we just get through the examples in the indictment of media, allegedly favorable media coverage. And that doesn't even deal with the other aspects of case 4000, which is the Walla case, not to mention case 1000 and 2000. So, looks like we're going to be in this for a very long haul.
And as you said, it's already been 3, 4, 5 years, was it? And now with this kind of pace, are you thinking that the testimony itself could be another year or so, or is there some kind of deadline?
I don't think there's a deadline, because this is the defense. This is the case for the defense, and I don't think the court really can impose any strict limits on the ability of the defendant to properly defend himself. I mean, I think we're looking at very many months of Netanyahu's testimony, and this is the primary questioning. We haven't even come to the cross-examination. So I mean, at this rate, it is conceivable we'll go into 2026 with Netanyahu still giving testimony.
May we all live so long. Let's go to a short break.
We, the Holocaust survivors, are a rapidly diminishing group. We are in the last moments of being able to share with our young people our first-hand testimonies. Time is rapidly running out. Each year sees smaller numbers of survivors able to accompany students on the March of the Living. Marching with students and survivors from many countries in those terrible places allows our students to learn and understand through stories and eyewitness accounts about our resilience, our strength, and our determination.
This Yom HaShoah, the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Day, many survivors like Ava want to march at the International March of the Living in Auschwitz. They need your help. To sponsor a survivor on the March of the Living, go to motl.org.
And we're back. After an unprecedented 16 months without a permanent Supreme Court president, and in the face of unrelenting opposition from Justice Minister Yariv Levin, Justice Isaac Amit was elected head of Israel's top court on Sunday night in a court-forced vote by the Judicial Selection Committee. So much to unpack here, Jeremy. I mean, just from the beginning that the vote had to be forced by the court, that in fact is appointing its president. So much to talk about here. But let's talk about, first of all, the idea that Yariv Levin is ostensibly boycotting the new president of the Supreme Court. So what do you know about this?
Right. Well, we knew this was something Levin was planning ever since the court ordered him for the first time back in September to actually hold a vote and appoint a new Supreme Court president. Yariv Levin has actually, since the very beginning of his political career, sought to change the way the judiciary in Israel works. And since he came into office as Justice Minister, he has sought to assert greater government control over the way the judiciary is appointed. And during his judicial overhaul agenda in 2023, he tried to also completely overhaul the aspect of the principle of judicial review and make it much harder for the court to exert judicial review, meaning to be able to strike down or modify government decisions and Knesset legislation. And in that, he's incredibly ideologically opposed in almost all circumstances to judicial review. It seems that he can only imagine that it can be reserved for the most extreme examples. The fact that the court ordered him in September to hold a vote, just really triggered him in a way that is, just really made him incredibly angry. He said that decision unlawfully expropriated his powers as chairman of the Judicial Selection Committee, which makes the appointment of the president and makes all the other judicial appointments. He said, that unlawfully took away his powers to convene the committee to decide when appointments should be made and so on. He said it made him a rubber stamp.
And he didn't actually convene the hearing on Sunday night, correct? It was actually some kind of lackey or underling of Yariv Levin?
That's right. Well, it wasn't a lackey. It was the head of the Israel Courts Administration, who is himself a judge. And basically, since September, the court ordered him another 3 times to convene the committee. And instead of actually convening the committee, he appears to have delegated the authority to the head of the Israel Courts Administration to convene the committee. We don't know how. The law does not specify any way to convene the Judicial Selection Committee apart from the Justice Minister convening it. So I asked the Justice Minister's office, I asked the Israel Courts Administration office. No one actually gave me a straight answer as to how this happened. So, it's an unprecedented event that somehow in some legal mechanism, the committee was convened in the first place. And that's to go, that goes before even talking about the fact that, as you said, he had to be ordered to convene the committee in the first place, and that now he's boycotting the head of Israel's judiciary. For the Justice Minister of Israel to boycott the head of Israel's judicial authority is, obviously unprecedented, never happened before in history. And, it testifies to the complete breakdown of relations between at least between Levin and to a large extent the government and the Supreme Court and the judicial authority, and really reflect this kind of slow simmering constitutional crisis that we've had over the last 2 years since the government has taken office, in which the two branches of government are really struggling against each other. It's a kind of like a massive battle of the titans, and that battle is yet to be decided.
So it wasn't only Levin who boycotted this vote, though, right? There were 2 other members of Knesset who also did not show up. And so the whole makeup of the vote was skewed in a way in Isaac Amit's favor. So what does this mean? It's so mystifying. This whole thing is crazy. What does this mean?
Well, I think that, we can see this on a couple of levels. Firstly, there's the kind of symbolic level in that by boycotting the vote, I think that does, even though it's obviously, I guess the slightly mendacious tactic, it does actually deprive Amit of some of the legitimacy of becoming to the head of the Supreme Court. I think Levin would say in the first place that Amit's stature has been diminished by the fact that there's these allegations which were brought up against him really at the last moment about professional misconduct and some other issues, like not declaring a conflict of interest when he sounds some cases. So Levin would already say that his stature and authority has been diminished by his own actions. But I think we have to look at that starting right back from the beginning, that Levin never wanted to appoint Amit as the head of the Supreme Court, which is basically, he was the next man in line, because Israel, since the founding of the state, since the founding of the court, has had this seniority system where the justice on the Supreme Court with the most years on the court automatically becomes the only candidate to be nominated for the president. And, Levin didn't like that because he wanted to take the court in a conservative direction. The head of the Supreme Court is, along with the Justice Minister, one of only 2 people who can actually by themselves nominate judges for Israel's lower courts. And the head of the Supreme Court, the president of the Supreme Court, the Justice Minister needs his approval to appoint presidents of district courts. In order to appoint an ombudsman for judges, to review complaints against judges, you need the Justice Minister and the Supreme Court President to agree on that nomination, which is ironically something which has come up within this battle between Amit and Levin. And so you need cooperation on all these levels, and meaning the Supreme Court President has a lot of power above and beyond just simply his control over administrative processes within the Supreme Court. And Levin knew this, and from the beginning he wanted to abandon the seniority system in order not to appoint Amit after Esther Flight retired. And so obviously I think that the allegations against Amit were problematic, and I think they should have been properly reviewed. But Levin stalled on making this appointment for so long, 16 months, that essentially the court ran out of patience with him. And I think it was also a kind of an issue of how this would look. That like I said, the court ordered Levin to make the appointment in September, and he said do so in short order. And then by December, he still hadn't done that, so ordered him again in December. Then like 3 days before the deadline in January, these allegations come up, and Levin says, "Oh well, we want all these allegations against Amit. We have to start reviewing them." And then he asks even for another. There's a certain amount of patience the court can have, especially after 15, 16 months. And I think it would just look like the court was being strung along by Levin in this kind of game, and that it didn't believe that it could do so anymore. So eventually the court just said, if you haven't appointed a new ombudsman to review complaints against judges, Levin refused to do so because he wanted to have he didn't want to have a former Supreme Court judge be that ombudsman. So there's no Supreme Court there's no judge's ombudsman to review the complaints against Amit. So the High Court told Levin the only body now authorized to review these complaints is the Judicial Selection Committee. go to them. If they think they need more time to review the complaints against Amit, then that's their decision. But you now have to convene the committee in order to talk about and elect a new president. So that is, that's the massive mess we ended up with just a few days ago, and which was ultimately decided by the vote of that Judicial Selection Committee without any members of the coalition to finally appoint Isaac Amit.
And obviously, Justice Amit is more liberal than Justice Minister Yariv Levin. And I would assume that a lot of this jockeying around is also because of the judicial overhaul legislation that is apparently again in the pipeline, correct? Jeremy, you're meant to be listening to a hearing very soon at the Knesset about this. So what is the status right now of all this legislation that was rolled out and rolled back out?
So the truth is that the new proposals which Justice Minister Levin has proposed to change the way judges are appointed, that can actually be brought to a vote pretty quickly, because it's based on the old legislation, which which sparked the massive public protests and the whole divide over the judicial overhaul in 2023. That legislation, which was more extreme than what we have right now, was frozen at the end of March, but it was frozen and never taken off the Knesset's agenda. So now what they've done is they've brought that legislation back to the Constitution Committee, and essentially Levin intends to hold several hearings, in the committee during the course of the rest of January and February, and he wants to pass this legislation by the end of February. So again, we're looking at a very tight deadline, a very tight timeline for the passage of incredibly consequential legislation, which goes to the heart of how Israel's judiciary functions, bearing in mind that Israel does not have any other checks and balances on executive and legislative power apart from the Supreme Court. That's obviously going to worry a lot of people with the kind of, the speed and pace that is being done, especially since the current proposals are not thought by a lot of experts and academics, especially the more liberal ones, to be much better than the previous version, meaning we are likely to see a lot of opposition to this as well, especially if there's an attempt to really ram it through the Knesset, like happened, in the last round.
And all of this as the war continues, of course. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.